Hi, I'm Veronica Johnson. This is narrative three of the math identity thing. Um, I want to be an elementary school teacher, and when it comes to specifically teaching mathematics, like for the rest of it, I want to employ scaffolding based methods, which seem to be the most effective when it comes to teaching children or really anybody new things, new concepts, new material, which involves building off of what they already know. And specifically for elementary school children, specifically for young children who we know are specifically struggling and developing the idea and ability to think abstractly, it's really important for mathematics to sort of employ a CPA framework, conceptual, pictorial, abstract, which includes going from manipulatives, using like physical manipulatives, um, to like pictorial representations where they can draw themselves to abstract representations of these concepts. Um, which right here, I think it's reversed, but it's the number 12, and which is right here with like a tens block and like two one units. Uh, Sorry. In order to, and it goes beyond just that, because scaffolding and ideas like the zone of proximal development are directly in response to this idea that you're building on prior knowledge, not directly in response, just are about building on prior knowledge. So for young children who understand blocks but don't understand like the number 12, like that's like, okay, that's how you teach them numbers. But for other stuff, it involves being able to correctly identify specifically what they know and what they don't know and where to build off from, which would be my second intention. Being able to identify their errors in math and being able to build off of that, be able to explain why they made those errors, be able to make them identify their own errors, and things of that nature. Uh, Things like this. These are all reversed, aren't they? This is three different errors I have for the problem 12 times 14. The first one right here is the correct answer, 168, but for this specific algorithm, you would have to like add them up at the bottom after doing it, and by not doing so, the error would be that there's an inability to articulate it, which could possibly, most likely indicate that they do not understand exactly how they got their answer, which is a conceptual issue, which means while they might not have problems with this specific problem, they will most likely have an issue down the road because they do not understand how they got to their answer. With something like the second one right here, they get the wrong answer, and you can tell how they made the wrong answer. I had to do another class before this one, and it was really fun because we had to go when we would turn in our homework, we would have to check the answer key, and then the answer key would have intentional errors in it, and we had to explain what those errors were. And it was really fun because it was like you were grading after like a little kid. Uh, and it would have errors like this. They were a little bit more they're a little trickier and a lot more fun than what I'm about to do. These are really simple errors. But like for this one, like they get like 12 times 14 is 18. And how would a kid get that? A kid would get that by doing it how they would do addition. So they multiply by the 4 times the 2 and they get 8. And then they don't know what to do, so they just move over like they do with addition, multiply 1 by 1, they get 18, and then they get the answer of 18. So they get 1 and then they get 18, which would be they're unfamiliar with the algorithm. They're relying on an older algorithm. They're relying on like an addition algorithm. And then we have this other one right here where they get 178, and you can see that they get the right numbers down here, but then they add them up wrong. So which is the simple error they have? Maybe they miscounted on their fingers. There are anyway though. These are all different errors that point to like different issues that a kid may be having when it comes to math. If a kid is unable to articulate their reasoning, if they're unable to really conceptualize what these math concepts mean, what the numbers mean, then it might be helpful to bust out like the manipulatives again. Because being able to see it, or being able to touch it, or being able to draw it might really help them get that like more nuanced, more concrete understanding of it. If they're just unfamiliar with the algorithm, you can just you can go over with it with them again. If they're really struggling with it, there's other algorithms. This is not the only way to do multiplication. There's other ways to do it. And I don't mean that in the way of like, oh, well, some kids, have to do this other algorithm, but they'll get the right answer. I think all kids should be, I think, not as in like, I think they should all like actually be able to do it, but I think they should all be able to do every single algorithm, but with an emphasis on the words be able. Not per se that they should, but if they were tasked with the ability of doing every single one, they should be able to figure that out. I feel like it's the job of the teacher to be able. Basically, I don't want to fall into the idea that certain kids have to do things certain ways. I think it's good to rely on that as a scaffolding measure, as a scaffolding method. Like, oh, this kid struggles with this specific part of math. So if we give them this algorithm, if we teach this to them, they'll be able to understand it better. I think that's a good thing. I think that's really good. But I don't think that should substitute them understanding different algorithms. I think it's good that they are able to understand not only how they naturally come to think of it, but also how other people think of it themselves. I think both of those are very important. Because we're not trying to make them comfortable and we're not trying to make them do what they already know how to do. We're trying to specifically make them uncomfortable and get them used to the idea of being uncomfortable and being wrong. Because that's the entire idea of the zone of proximal development, which is the third intention. Um, I'll articulate that in a little bit better. The whole idea of the zone of proximal development is that learning is most beneficial when it is difficult but achievable. So we want the kids to struggle. We want them to we want them to reasonably struggle. We don't want to like beat them to death, We don't beat them anymore because it doesn't work. Um, we used to beat them because that's how we would teach them, but now we don't beat them because we found it's something that works better. That's the way I like to joke about it. I think it's funny. Um, oh, oh my god. Anyway, it's most beneficial to them when they struggle with it a bit. But then you have kids who don't have an ability to struggle. They get to like a little bit of like challenge and they throw the pen down and they can't do it. They have an inability to struggle because the ability to struggle is itself an ability that can be taught, that can be refined, and it's also a skill you can be bad at. There are people who have higher frustration tolerances, and there's people who have low frustration tolerances, and that's dependent on a lot of things. There are biological factors that factor into that. There are social factors that factor into that. But at the end of the day, it is something that can be changed. In fact, most things that people do, because of how the brain works, and we went over this with the growth mindset stuff, uh, because of how the brain works, because of neuroplasticity, because of how it reshapes itself in response to the environment, every single person pretty much on the planet, unless they have some very hyper-specific intellectual disability that alters the way the brain functions, every single person, given enough time, effort, and resources, can master pretty much any mental skill. They can understand any concept if they really try hard enough at it. That is like fundamentally true. That is like if that weren't true, there would be like no like point in like teaching anybody anything. We just like why would we even bother with all this if that wasn't true? And it is true. We know that because of how the brain works. Because of blah, blah blah blah. I don't want to get into it. Uh, anyway, however, with the zone of proximal development stuff, um, I didn't. Back to the growth. Oh my gosh, what have I said so far? Manipulatives, being able to identify their errors, to be able to properly implement scaffolding. Oh, right. And also, I want to be open and honest about why I'm teaching the way I'm teaching, which is why I brought up the zone of proximal development. Um, I don't know if I'll use this term specifically because it is, a bit for a kid it might be a mouthful, or like a student it might be a mouthful and not super relevant. But the core idea of it, I do want to communicate. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to build on your prior knowledge, to help you better understand because that's with our current modern understanding of how people learn. That is like, wow, that's how you'll learn best if I build off of what you already know. because that gives them an understanding of why I'm doing the thing I'm doing. Because I am specifically trying to frustrate them. I am specifically trying to make them struggle. I'm specifically trying to make them have a little bit of a hard time. I want them to be able to overcome that. I want them to be able to handle that. I want them to be able to do it again because they know there's a reward at the end. Understanding some sort of like the reward being like understanding a concept at a higher level of understanding. That's just the same thing twice. Um, but I mean, I can say all that regardless. At the end of the day, I am still trying to basically torment these people. I'm specifically trying to inflict some sort of like horrible psychological warfare against them because it will it will improve their understanding of certain concepts, and in the long run it is ultimately better for them. Stress in this case is good, um as long as doesn't completely overwhelm them and doesn't become like toxic stress. um I'm being a bit dramatic here, you know what I mean. I mean, like, it's important that they struggle and they can handle that because life is full of that, and that's it also is most valuable. Like, what you learn is taken from what you struggle with, at least. Ooh, I'm not explaining myself well, you know what I mean. Man, and I want to be a teacher and I can't even explain like this. All right, I'm getting too snippy. All right, but that's basically it. I want to teach elementary school. Those kids are specifically developing the ability to think abstractly, which means you need to show them what you're trying to teach them physically, what they understand, and they don't understand one and two. They can't read that well yet. They can probably read a little bit, but they're still struggling with learning how to read. And you want them to learn everything like ones and twos. You need to be able to show visually and concretely what a one is. Like when I write one, oh, you can't see. When I write one, I need them to understand that I mean one unit. I need one thing, whatever we're talking about. One thing. I need them to understand that. But if I don't teach them that, then they're not going to know. They're just going to go, that's a thing. And they're not going to understand like basic concepts. And that applies to every single step in like their sort of learning process. So it's very important that you get it every single time, and you can identify where they're lacking, so you can go back and you can refresh. You can try a new method of attack. You can try a new angle. You can try a new strategy. And if they know this, if they understand that this is how they're being taught and this is how they learn and this is how they best learn, then they can do it themselves, and then they can identify their own errors, and then they will hopefully build a higher level of frustration tolerance, which will increase their capacity to learn, which is my overall goal. Those are my three intentions. Oh goodness, it's a mouthful. All right, happy month break. I think y'all get a break. I get a break. I hope y'all get a break, you poor things.